Reactive training systems.
A week ago when we started having an interesting conversation
Mm.
about it, said something along the lines of like it's a mistake to think the only reason that a lift performance might dip from one week to the next is accumulated
Mm.
fatigue. And I guess what I meant by that was like lots of times you see somebody who, they have their primary squat day or whatever lift performances down slightly compared to where it was the week
Mhm.
prior. And that's just kind of reflexively chalked up to accumulated fatigue. And, I think there's plenty of other ways that performance is about a lot more than
Yeah.
just, how strong are you and do you have any fatigue present? You know, things like there's short-term things like maybe you're a little
Yeah.
dehydrated or, are your externals in line? But then also like programmatic things too, like maybe the program just isn't doing what you wish it was, It should on paper, and I know that there's people that like to say like there's no way that lifting weights can make you weaker. Well, I mean, to
Yeah.
differ, I've seen people lift weights and not get
Nope.
stronger,
I agree.
definitely lift less after a while.
Yeah.
Um, so something like that could be happening,
Yep.
and it could be any number of things like
Mhm.
that. And you mentioned progression
Yep.
error as being another potential thing going on there. Can you say a little bit more about
Well,
that?
I think it's just like, the whole goal is finding the sweet spot where that your athlete needs at a certain time. Um, but, if you're coming into competition and you're a certain amount of weeks out, but the weeks previous, or the blocks previous to, when you need to perform at your best weren't really the best performing in general, you know, that can have a compounding effect on to where you are right now. You might have, you know, played with volume and intensity too much, or at a point where, you've got this training program that you've planned out for an athlete and they weren't really, you know, performing to the standard that you need to be able to hit certain numbers in a peak of a competition. So that can have an effect. And it was not just that week of, being dehydrated or, not being, externals being present and things like that. It could have been that the performance 2 blocks ago wasn't where you needed it to be, and, too much volume was cut out too early or put in too late. Those things can also have a compounding effect later on in a competition prep. You might not have deloaded the athlete enough or at the right time, or followed the trends that they were setting with changes in block length structure that might need to be going into a competition. All of those things can have an effect on the performance at the end of a prep. So I think, you know, from a coaching standpoint, one thing that I've been developing is looking at weekly performance and weekly markers a lot closer. And that's kind of where I was going with my answer to you.
I would love to hear more about that. Like, as you look at, I guess, more specifically, like which markers are you looking at
Yeah.
and what are you looking for?
So the biggest ones I'm looking for, if you're going to use data points, are going to be speed of bar, if the athlete's using a BBT, reported RPE week to week, and the load intensity on the bar, whether or not it's moving the way you need it to move. Those are the big ones for me. And then it comes to like stress, sleep, reporting factors. Those are the big ones for me. I'd like to go down exploring BBT a lot more in terms of I've got a couple of athletes who use it specifically for squatting, and I want to develop more systems on looking at those bar speeds closer in each session and then weekly. I think they're the big ones I'm looking at the moment. I find if an athlete, if you get to understand their RPE rating using the VBT, I think it's an excellent tool to be able to see if what you're prescribing weekly is going to end to the end goal of the block, if that makes sense. That's where my head's going with it. And if I've got an athlete who's really good at reporting their actual RPE, that helps me heaps if they're really spot on with it.
Yeah, I would definitely second the value of velocity data, especially for those primary days,
Yeah.
especially for, assessing single. I mean, I think I'm a big fan in general, so I think it's got a lot of utility in other areas of training as well, just to kind of give you that objective insight on, are you being as accurate and truthful as you think you're being with your RPE ratings and things like that. I think it's really helpful there. But when it comes to the singles and performance assessment, it just gives a more clear view, more clear than even video does by itself, I think.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Because, each athlete moves at a different speed based on what they're going to rate the RPE at, right? So if you've got those two markers and you can and they meet up, then you know that what you're prescribing is doing its job.
Just take it that, for example, singles. Let's talk about squat singles for a second. You may have a fairly small velocity difference between two singles, and if you were to even like try to match up the videos and play them side by side, they look basically the same, right? But I know from having looked at this for a long time that 0.02 meters per second difference in the velocity, it is a meaningful difference. It's not huge, but it means something, and it's a signal that's worth paying attention to.
Yeah.
So if I assume that you're looking for, well, maybe I shouldn't assume. As you're looking at load, velocity, and RPE, are you looking for some to progress, some to stay the same? Like, is there a kind of a pattern to it? What are you looking for?
That's one of my goals of this year, is to really get into more of the data reading around it. I think at the moment I'm just looking for the big markers, like if it's slowing down. So,
Yeah, we're going the wrong
the wrong
direction.
direction. At the moment, I think with having those three markers, I think you could get really like in depth with it. I think though, to keep it simple, it's, looking at week to week and also block to block on what's slowing or what's getting faster based on the changes that I've made. And I think also, for those who like to use it and like to read the data, it helps them to understand if the load they put on the bar is the right choice, if I'm just using RPE, or if I've prescribed it, if the prescription is accurate. I think those are the big markers at the moment. But as I said, you could get really in depth with it, using it with testing. I know TSG do that, using it with testing and things like that. That's kind of things I'd like to start playing with in the future.
I think it's a really interesting topic because in an ideal setting without any confounding externals, ideally an athlete has momentum week per week. So we ramp those up, right? But that's not always the case. And there's also what we think might be different types of responders. So we have certain athletes that just don't show any type of response up until the end of the block. We even have some athletes that have a dip in performance, or it just fluctuates week to week. I'm always wondering, is this something we just should accept with certain athletes, or is there still something that we can change to improve and achieve a linear progression?
I think both of those answers are correct there. I think there's times you need to accept that with an athlete, and that's kind of where I was going at before with, Meg. There's going to be times that, it is what it is, right? You can't help if you've got two sick children. And there is times where, it's the opposite. So I think being adaptable in those situations is super important, and understanding what you can control and what you can't control. Like even if you do see that the VBT is slowed down and you're in a peak, you're not going to change anything. Like, if you've made that decision that, you're 2 weeks out, and if it slows down, like, you can make small changes, but you're not going to you don't have time to overhaul the program there, do you? So it's just understanding like what you're using that data for. I think it's very valuable, especially primary sessions at the end of a block, like to, match the same load, two blocks earlier at the same point of a block, to see, if the athlete's getting stronger, because theoretically, if the bar's moving faster, the athlete's getting stronger, right? So that's kind of where the markers are. But I don't think you can. I think you just have to take it in your stride, and take it as a point of reference, not as a point to completely write a whole program on.
Yep. If we see sometimes repeatability, then we can increase our predictability in the end. So it's not always, it doesn't always come down to damage control. Even if an athlete is in a prep, we don't always have to save everything. Sometimes it's all about just knowing what cards we're going to play with at the competition, knowing what the outcome could be.
Yep.
That's true. Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been spending more time lately kind of coaching through those like loading decisions too. Like last week we squatted X and it moved at Y velocity. So my recommendation is that this week we try to take aim at this, we're going to try to take aim at plus 5 kilos this week, because last week was so good. Or, it wasn't really an overshoot, but it was like right on the line, so this week we're going to stick to our 2.5, even if things during warm up are feeling good, just trying to coach through those decisions and kind of thinking through that from like a progression and momentum sort of standpoint as well. It seems like if you get into a rhythm where you're adding weight each week and maintaining your velocity, or even at times moving it a bit better, that's just a better place to be in versus more on the back foot where you're trying to, we selected a weight that's maybe only like 5 kilos too heavy, but it just moved a little bit slow. So next week we're actually going to drop back 2.5. And, like, I do think the loading decisions matter, to that degree, but it's better to do it from a position of kind of building that momentum. So yeah, I found that lately, especially, things kind of come and go in waves and cycles too. It seems like lately I've definitely been coaching more of that level of decision making as well, where these kinds of tools have applicability.
I agree.
Hey, let me tell you something that I know about you. Your lifting is important to you. It's probably one of your biggest priorities. And for people like us, nothing compares to the feeling that you get when you set a new PR. That feeling of being the best that you've ever been, of doing something that you've never done before. This is what we're all after, and it's also what RTS specializes in. Getting you the absolute best program possible so that you can hit new PRs and reach your goals. We call it radically individualized training, and we're really good at it. Whether we need to account for busy schedules or equipment limitations, or precisely turn the dials and get the details of the program just right, we have the tools and the experience to guide your lifting to the next level. To us, coaching is all about leadership, relationship, and creative problem solving. A coach should be poised to help you make tough decisions about training and competing so that you can continually grow in your development. And of course, a coach should be a first-rate problem solver, especially when it comes to your training, technique, and strategy. Now, all this has to be built off of a really strong, professional coaching relationship that emphasizes trust and respect. Additionally, RTS coaches are not on an island. We have a strong network of professionals to reach out to, so if you find yourself in need of some specific expertise, say in the realm of nutrition or injury management or sports psychology, there's a deep expertise available there too. For more information, go to store.reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on coaching. That's store.reactivetrainingsystems.com, then click on coaching. Hope to see you on the team soon.